What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Powerhouse Mentality podcast. I am your host. I am Caitlin Kenna Smith, and on today's episode, we're going to continue my story. If you guys have been following along with this podcast series, it's been a few weeks since I posted an episode in this series, but the reason for that is honestly because I need time to collect my thoughts when it comes to telling my story and talking about my journey, because there's been a lot of shit that's happened. So it takes me a little bit of time to be able to navigate, okay, what's important, what's not important, and really remember a lot of the times, because a lot of the times I don't remember very well just because of all of the physical and emotional stress I put my body through. But the last piece of my story, piece number 2, we spoke about my journey through recovery and my journey through relapsing. And that's kind of where we finished, is when I had just kind of had that realization that, hey, I'm relapsing and I need to take control of this eating disorder once and for all so that it doesn't kill me. And I was struggling through my senior year of college, which is inevitably where we will start this episode. So story piece number 3. And the biggest lesson that I want you guys to take away from the third piece here is rock bottom is a beautiful place. And it might sound really cliche to say that, but what I've found every single time that I hit rock bottom is that it usually leads to a breakthrough. And as awful as it feels in the moment, I wouldn't change it for the world when I look back at it, because all of these moments where I hit rock bottom, like truly hit rock bottom, those are moments that helped catapult me to moving onto the right path and truly discovering what I was meant to do on this planet. Now, I barely got through my senior year of college because of how much I was struggling with my eating disorder. I was just so emotionally destroyed, I would say would be a good word, because I was really working through all of these things that I was struggling with when it came to just my relationship with food, and the fact that I was still training very, very hard in bodybuilding, doing excessive amounts of cardio, and I was finally starting to recover from this piece when I hired my first coach. And my first coach, like I mentioned on the last story, he told me he would not put me on a stage until I was able to build muscle, put on more size, and actually put myself through a proper reverse diet so I can actually eat more to fuel my body, to regulate my hormones, to regulate my digestion, to feel better, not just physically, but emotionally repair my relationship with food, which at that point was destroyed. Like, I didn't really have a relationship with food. It was basically just I did not want to eat food. And I felt like if I ate an apple, it would be detrimental to my results because an apple has sugar in it. That's how bad I was at that point. So when I hired my first coach, Nick, I committed to saying, you know what? Whatever he tells me to do, whatever the workout programming looks like, I'm not going to add more to it. Whatever the cardio looks like, I'm not going to add more to it. Whatever the food looks like, I'm going to follow those macros to a T. I'm going all in on this because I have no other option. And at this point, I was also a personal trainer at Crunch Fitness in Brooklyn, which is where my career really just started to take off in personal training, because I was there consistently instead of like hopping from Blink, where I was for about a year, and then going to New York Sports Club, where I was for a month or two, and then finally finding my home at Crunch. And talk about a family, because, man, shout out to all of those trainers who worked at that Crunch location in Fort Greene, Brooklyn at the time that I was there, because they were true family and they really fucking cared about me. And we all cared about each other. You know, of course, there were like a select few who, like, you know, they just kind of come in, train their clients and leave. But the majority of the people that I met through that time in my life had a significant impact on my life, because they saw what I was going through. It's hard to hide what you're going through when you're struggling with an addiction, but they were more than willing to help me and push me to become better. And I have so much gratitude for all of those people. Now, like I said, no matter what, I was going to follow exactly what my coach told me. And I did. I really did. Usually, I would always, at the beginning, I really had those thoughts where I was like, you know what? This isn't enough volume. I'm going to add more volume. Or he doesn't want me to do any cardio. I'm going to do a little bit of cardio. But it came to a point where I was like, fuck this. I'm not going to do that because I hired this person to help me to become a different version of myself. And if I continue to do what I always do, then I'll just be stuck. I'll continue to be stuck. I'll never get to where I want to go in my life. So I really need to double down and break the habit of being myself. So he cut out all cardio. He lowered my volume and increased the intensity of the working sets of the volume. And I was eating a crap ton of food. I think at one point I was eating like 120 grams of fat, which to me wasn't good for my body because over time we learned that like my body prefers more carbs just because I feel super sluggish when I eat that much fat. But it's all a learning curve, right? At that point, I was just eating a ton of calories and it was helping build up my body, but also build up my relationship with food because I was no longer fearing certain foods and I was no longer food obsessed. And that was honestly, that period of time in my life was probably the most free that I felt with food, even more so than today, because today I still do very much struggle with my relationship with food, which I will talk about on another episode because it's very relevant and it will help a lot of people with the journey that I'm taking on right now. However, I could go off on the rabbit hole and then we won't even get to the point of this podcast. So after about a year of really committing with Nick, who was my coach at the time, following his programming, going through a proper bulk, going through a proper reverse diet, I got from, I think it was like 98, 95 pounds when I started with him, all the way up to 130 something pounds before I went into prep for my second bikini show, but my first bikini show with an actual coach. So I gained about 30 pounds. And not all of it was muscle. I gained body fat. And one thing that I want to just voice, because it's on the top of my mind right now, is that when I was at my lowest at 89 pounds, my body was broken. It was destroyed. My hormones were a mess. When I got my blood work done at the eating disorder clinic the first time, my estrogen was undetectable. I hadn't had a menstrual cycle since 2012. And I still haven't had a menstrual cycle. And it's 2024. My digestion has never been the same since I had my eating disorder because there were periods of time during my eating disorder where I was eating 80 to 100 grams of fiber a day. It wrecked my gut. The stress wrecked my gut. It wrecked all of my hormones. My body is still hurting from the damage that I did to it. So for those of you who are out there who are maybe struggling with an eating disorder or disordered eating or know somebody who is, I want you to understand how truly serious this shit is. It's not just like, oh, I'll remain in this phase for a little bit of time and then I'll be okay. It's been 12 years since I've had a menstrual cycle. And some people might be like, oh, that's awesome. Like, you don't have to deal with that every month. That's what I thought at first, too. Until I actually started to learn that, oh, you might not be able to have a family now. Which 12 years ago really didn't fucking matter to me. But now that I have a husband, it matters to me. These are things that people don't think about. The fact that I have nerve damage in certain parts of my body because of the overtraining that I did under such a stressed state. I have intercostal nerve damage. Your intercostal muscle is the one like that wraps around your core in your rib cage. I actually currently have a flare up with it. So a lot of times when I do like overhead stuff, a lot of overhead volume or a lot of core work, I'll get that flare up in that nerve damage. So then it just feels like I'm being pinched all the way around my rib cage. It's not comfortable. These are things that I did to myself, and I take 100% responsibility for it. I don't try to blame anybody or anything else for what I did to myself. But the reason why I'm sharing all this isn't to get attention, because I don't fucking care about that. If I cared about getting attention, I would buy Instagram followers, or I would only show the highlight reel, or I would sell my soul and post stupid shit just to get views. But I don't do that because I actually care about helping people, helping real people get real results, and helping real people get out of tough situations and build the mindset that I know that they're capable of. Because if I'm able to do it, then damn it, everybody's able to do it. Because I was so fucking broken. So when I was able to get up to 133 pounds, I thought at that point, like, I would be okay. I would be hormonally fine. I'd get my menstrual cycle back. I wouldn't have pain all the time. My digestion would be fine, but it wasn't the case. But instead of being like, you know what? I should probably just stay in this spot and just do fitness for the love of fucking fitness, or start focusing on performance, which if I could go back in time, man, I would do that. However, I was obsessed with the idea of stepping on a bodybuilding stage again, more so for redemption, because I felt like a loser the last time I stepped on stage, and I was dead last, and I was so skinny that it was almost comical when I went up on stage. So it was an ego thing. And like I said, if I could go back in time, I would absolutely shift my perspective, focus on performance, because then I would be way further along on my journey than I currently am. However, everything happens for a reason. And I went through the journey that I went through for a reason. So at 133 pounds, Nick and I found a competition, and I made the decision that I was going to go into prep to compete in my second bikini competition with the NPC. I went into what was supposed to be a 16-week prep that turned into a 24-week prep because this is actually a funny story. And it's one of those stories where it's so ridiculous that you may not believe me, but I can 100% confirm that this happened. So I think I was about 4 weeks out from the first originally planned competition. So I was 12 weeks into prep. And I was watching one of my clients' dogs in her apartment in Brooklyn. So I was staying there, watching her dog while her and her husband were on vacation. And they had just recently got married. So they had really sharp new knives. And because I was on prep, obviously I was meal prepping all of my meals. And I was cutting up raw sweet potatoes so I can put them into the oven to cook them. And I was chopping them. And like I said, I was not used to sharp knives at the time because I was using all my grandma's knives that were like, who knows, 10 to 20 years old and dull as hell. So I chopped a little bit too aggressively, and I chopped the tip of my thumb off. To this day, I still have a scar. And when it happened, I didn't think much of it. I was like, oh, I just cut myself. And then all of a sudden, I started to realize that, wow, it's bleeding a lot. Like, I remember I went down to the lobby of the apartment. It was an apartment building, so that I could talk to the concierge to have him call an ambulance for me because my phone was dead. And I started to get very dizzy in the apartment because I was literally bleeding through an entire roll of paper towels at that point. So he called an ambulance. Got to the hospital, was able to call my parents. My parents picked me up, brought me back to the apartment because I had to watch the dog. The dog was fine, by the way. I did find the tip of the thumb later, but basically they couldn't do anything about it because I didn't bring the tip of the thumb with me to the emergency room, so they had nothing to kind of work with, so they just had to wait for it to stop bleeding because it wasn't in a position where you could stitch it up. So I waited. It eventually stopped bleeding because the human body is an incredible thing, but that's not where the story ends. So, we're fine. We just have a bandaged up thumb, and it's fine because it's just one hand. So I can make it work with training and stuff. Now, when your body's in an extreme calorie deficit, because at that point I was eating maybe 1,300 calories in that prep, I was in a deep calorie deficit in that prep. That's just the nature of the beast when it comes to any bodybuilding show, any competing, any prep. It's extremely unhealthy. It is not sustainable. And if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, then you should probably stop doing it. So I had this thumb thing, and then I remember I was home. It was about a week later, and I still had the bandage on my thumb. Obviously, I was changing the bandage, okay? And my other thumb was starting to hurt like really bad, to the point where it was red, it was inflamed, it was super swollen, it was super hot. And I remember I woke my mom up in the middle of the night and I was like, I think something's wrong with my other thumb. So we went to urgent care the next day. Somehow I had gotten an infection that went through the open wound on my other thumb and traveled to the other thumb. So now I had an infection in my thumb, so we had to pop open and drain it and all that fun stuff. And in order to fight the bacterial infection, they gave me antibiotics. At the time, I had no idea that I was allergic to antibiotics. Obviously, all antibiotics are different. However, this was one I have never had before. Can you guess what happened next? I was sitting in a meeting the next day at the gym in Brooklyn. It was just a trainer's meeting. I had bandages on both my thumbs. I had just finished a workout, and I started to feel really hot, like super flush. And I was like, I just finished a workout. It's probably what it is. But then I started to feel like really weird, like it was hard to breathe. And I was looking at my hands, and I was like, I kind of like rashes on my hands. This is weird. But again, I just worked out. I'm on prep. I'm super deprived of food. So I really didn't think too much of it until the person who was leading the meeting, our fitness manager, stopped mid-sentence, looked at me and said, Caitlin, are you okay? And in that moment, I thought, I don't think I am. I said, I think I'm having an allergic reaction. So he called an Ubered me to urgent care, and I was having an allergic reaction to the medication. So all of that transpired over a 2 to 3 week period. And Nick and I made the decision that, hey, our body needs to recover. You're way too stressed and inflamed to actually step on stage and get a good result. So let's move the show back. And we found one that was 8 weeks later. Now, being in prep for 24 weeks is really hard on the body, not just physically, but mentally. So I did a lot of damage to my body. During that prep, I ended up losing 30 pounds. So all the weight that I gained, I lost. And did I need to lose 30 pounds? Absolutely not. And within the last 2 weeks, I believe I lost 9 pounds. So it was wild. It was a wild experience to go through prep like that. And I think that it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about resiliency. It taught me a lot about discipline and what I'm truly capable of, because there were a lot of days where, damn it, I did not want to step on the Stairmaster for 60 minutes. But I was stepping on the Stairmaster for 60 minutes, doing 45-minute to 90-minute weight training session every day, except for my one rest day. And I was walking about 20 to 25,000 steps because I was living in Brooklyn at the time, because I did end up moving to an apartment that was about a mile away from the gym crunch that I worked at, because I wanted to save that 2.5 hour commute back and forth that I was doing every single day. And it really helped, especially because while I was in this prep, I was also trying to get a promotion at work, moving from head trainer to assistant fitness manager, since our assistant fitness manager ended up moving to another gym. So I saw that as my opportunity to be like, you know what? I want to make a career out of this. So why don't I just go for this? And that's literally what my life was. I had such intense tunnel vision. Nothing else mattered. I was addicted to this process. I had no social life. My career actually started suffering. I did end up getting promoted to assistant manager, and then I got demoted during my prep because I was so out of it and how dialed in I was on prep. I was training, eating, working, sleeping very little. And that period of my life, honestly, is like a complete blur because it was just so monotonous. And I was so deprived. And I was so just didn't care about anything else. I stepped on stage. I got dead last. I was too small. And I had a conversation with my coach, Nick, afterwards. And he said, to be competitive in this division with your body type, you probably need to go on some performance enhancing drugs. So he recommended me start Anabar. And that is when I made the decision to work with a different coach. And when I made the decision to never step on a stage again, because I realized that I was doing it for all of the wrong reasons. That prep taught me a lot. Being in bodybuilding taught me a lot. I met a lot of incredible people, but at the end of the day, I was doing it for the wrong reasons. And it led me to start to not really like fitness again. And I didn't want to be in that state of mind because fitness is something that I fucking love. I love being able to commit to a goal. I love being able to push your body outside the limits and really test to see what you're capable of. So I made the decision that, I'm just going to focus on the love of fitness that I have. Like, I'm going to lift weights. I'm going to lift heavy. I'm going to focus on getting strong as hell. I'm going to try to put on more muscle. And if I compete in the future, I compete in the future. But it wasn't on my radar. And to this day, I still haven't. And I never fucking will step on a bodybuilding stage. Ever. But after my competition, that's when life got really fucking crazy. About a week after my competition, and I'm still not proud of this, but however, it did set the tone for my life. When you have a goal and you are so tunnel visioned into a goal, say it's to step on stage like I did at a competition, then you step on stage at a competition and you are completely let down by how you perform, and now you have nothing to work for anymore. That's how I felt. I had this tunnel vision and then it was gone. And I had nothing. I felt so depressed. I was miserable. And so I reached out to my ex-boyfriend, who I had dated for 2 years prior. And we broke up probably 4 months prior to me calling him again. And we hadn't even spoken or anything. He moved down to North Carolina to become a firefighter. And that's when we broke up because I made the decision that I didn't want to go. And I went down to see him. I interviewed for a job at Fitness Connection. I got the job at Fitness Connection for assistant fitness manager in North Carolina. And 2 weeks after my show, I was moving down to North Carolina to live with my ex-boyfriend, who would then become my boyfriend for another year before the relationship went toxic. And although, like I said, I am not proud to say what I did, to call somebody and almost beg to have something back that I was missing. But you know what? It's part of life. And if I never move down to North Carolina, I never meet Stone. I never start working at Fitness Connection. And those two things completely changed the trajectory of my life. Fitness Connection and obviously my husband. And when I started my career at Fitness Connection, that's when everything blew up for me. That's when I became fucking obsessed with personal development. I became obsessed with sales. I became obsessed with becoming the best fitness manager I could be. And I did. I always sucked at sales. But then I actually started working on it. And I became really good at it. So good at it to the point where the DMs, the district managers, the VPs, the president, the CEO, they were reaching out to me. They were talking about me. And I eventually got promoted to membership or sales manager. And I worked as sales manager at the Cary location of Fitness Connection, which is the smallest location, for, I don't know, maybe 6 months. And I was constantly at the top in rankings for sales and memberships. And I eventually got promoted to the biggest location in the district at North Hills, where I worked for about a year. And when I worked there for a year, the main focus that I had, the only focus that I had, was to become a general manager, was to get that promotion. And it was dangled in front of me like a fucking carrot that entire year. I was top of the company in sales, but I kept getting passed over by other people who, in my opinion, did not deserve the promotion. However, everybody always gets what they deserve. And that company, while they were a great gym It was just very unethical. But if you worked in the fitness industry at all, if you worked at corporate gyms, you probably understand all of the shit that went down behind closed doors and all of the probably illegal things that happened when it came to hours and salaries, as far as like the amount of hours that I was actually working versus the amount of pay that I was making. But that's not the topic of today's episode. The point that I'm trying to make with this is that this is when I chose to focus on my career and just literally have tunnel vision towards that. I became obsessed with it. I do have a very addictive personality, can you tell? But that's also when I was training, I was meal prepping, I was on top of my macros, I was working with a different coach at the time, so I never fell out of fitness. I was always working really hard on bodybuilding in the gym, really working hard on building muscle and building strength, and becoming obsessed with that process, focusing on eating enough and fueling my body. And eventually, I did get promoted to general manager at the shittiest club in the district. But I brought the shittiest club in the district up into the top 5 in the country. And then I was promoted to a bigger club, one of the biggest clubs, as general manager. And I got that promotion in November of 2019. And from November of 2019 until April of 2020, I worked as the general manager at Pleasant Valley Fitness Connection. And that was the most depressed and miserable I'd ever been in my entire life. I worked every single day, 8 to 8, usually 8 to 9. Except for Sundays where I technically had the day off, but I was getting texts from my employees constantly throughout the day. I was getting to the gym at 5 a.m. to work out before my shift. And I struggled. And it was the first time in my career at Fitness Connection where I struggled. Where I wasn't at the top of the leaderboard. I wasn't at the top of the rankings. They weren't talking about me anymore. I felt like a fucking failure. And I'd been working towards this general manager position for years. And I got this position expecting it to be such an incredible thing, and it wasn't. It didn't meet up to my expectations. And I had nothing else. I literally had nothing else. The relationship that I was in went toxic, turned abusive. I kicked him out. So my mom was helping me with rent. When I got promoted, I was able to take care of my own rent, but then I had my best friend at the time, Megan, move in and be my roommate. We upgraded to a 2-bedroom, and I love that woman. I love that girl to death. I love her to death. And she was literally all that I had, just my friend. Because I was miserable at work. I was miserable at home. I was barely at home. I was basically at home to meal prep and sleep. And there was one night in February where I was driving home from work, and I was done. I saw nothing. I felt nothing. And I've never felt like that in my entire life, even through all the shit that I went through previously. I'd never felt like there's no hope, like there's nothing to live for. And so I made the decision that I was going to drive my car off into a pole. I missed the pole. And in that moment when I was sitting there realizing what had just happened and what I just did, I realized that I'm here for a reason. God didn't take me today for a reason. And then not even a month later, a little over a month later, the government shutdown happened and the gyms were closed for 2 weeks. And that 2 weeks turned into 6 months. And I had lost everything. Or so I thought. When the gyms closed, they furloughed us. Or, I'm sorry, they didn't furlough us initially. They said that they would continue to pay us for 2 weeks. Because we thought we would only be closed for 2 weeks. So I was like, okay, cool. This is like a really good opportunity for me to just like enjoy life outside of the gym. And when I had those 2 weeks, I realized, oh my God, there's so much to life outside of this gym that I want to experience. And I started just doing home workouts. I Took a kettlebell from Fitness Connection. Nobody needs to know about that. I still have the kettlebell. And then I bought weights. I started turning a garage into a gym. Like, it was really pathetic at the time. I had like a shitty rack that I bought off Amazon. I had a barbell that I bought from Dick's Sporting Goods and like a few sets of dumbbells that we had acquired. And I was like, you know what? This is actually really fucking cool. I'm going to start to like do different style of training. So I started doing more like functional bodybuilding, like more CrossFit, but not fully CrossFit. And then 4 weeks went by and they got us all on a call, a company-wide call. And during that call, I remember that day so vividly. They told us that we are furloughing every employee because we do not foresee this ending anytime soon. And I think back to this, honestly, as I'm talking about this, and this is wild that this actually fucking happened. But man, what a crazy time that was. They furloughed us all. And so they furloughed us, and I had no idea what furloughed means. So I looked it up, and I realized that I had basically lost my job. I was no longer going to get paid. I had lost everything that I had worked for. So, in typical Caitlin fashion, I hung up the phone, put my running shoes on, and went on a run because that was the only thing that felt right in the moment. I was running away from my problems. That was literally what I've done my whole life. And on that run, I started really thinking about things. And I started to realize, like, maybe Fitness Connection isn't where I'm meant to be. Maybe I'm meant to do something bigger than this. And all over social media, which I had started to finally get back into, like, I started posting again on Instagram. And I was like, you know, why not just start doing more social media stuff now that I have more time to do it? Because when I was working at Fitness Connection, I had no time to do anything. So I said, you know what? Let me start posting on social media. I was working with First Form at the time as an affiliate. So I was like, you know, why don't I start coaching in the First Form app and really start doing online coaching? Because that's something that I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to build my own online coaching business, but I always started making excuses of why I can't do it and how it's too hard. And during that time, I was listening to the MFCEO Project, which is Andy Frisella's old podcast before he started Real AF. And I was listening to that podcast religiously. And he started talking about this thing that he created called 75 Hard. And I said, you know, I'm going to do 75 Hard. Because if 75 Hard doesn't save me, nothing will. So on that day, on that run, I decided I'm going to do 75 Hard. Today is going to be day one. This is my outdoor workout. That's exactly what I did. And I never fucking looked back. If you knew me before I started 75 Hard, you knew a different Caitlin. Because I'm a completely different person. I would never have a podcast. I would never do videos on social media. I would never talk on social media. I wouldn't be able to articulate things the way that I'm able to articulate things now. I wouldn't be doing CrossFit. 75 Hard changed my fucking life. It saved my fucking life. And that's where I'm going to stop the podcast. Because the next story piece number 4, is going to be my journey through the Live Hard program. And I'm going to go through the 6 months of the government shutdown because between April and September, when the gyms were closed, my entire life completely changed in so many unbelievable ways. There were a lot of scary moments, but a lot of incredible things happened that I could never have imagined if the government shutdown didn't happen. So I made the choice that I wasn't going to allow this to end me. I was going to allow it to create me. I hope you guys found value from this episode of the podcast. If you did, please share it on your social medias. Share it with your friends. Somebody needs to hear this who isn't already listening to the Powerhouse Mentality podcast. And go out today and do one thing that's going to take you one step closer to where you want to be.